Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namassami. Good evening, everybody. Nice to see you. Nice to be back in Kuala Lumpur. It's been a while. How many of you have been to Bodh Gaya? You raise your hands. Have you been on the pilgrimage? Yeah, most of you. Very good. Those of you have probably studied, many of you have probably studied the life of the Buddha, and the period of time immediately after his enlightenment is very instructive. The weeks after his enlightenment, when the various contemplations that Lord Buddha was doing, so he practiced the middle way. He had insight, Lord Buddha had insight into the Four Noble Truths. So Lord Buddha, as a bodhisattva, was practicing at the Bodhi tree, and he had his insight into the Four Noble Truths, which is the insights particular to teaching Buddhas in the human world. Then, after his enlightenment, it's said that he would abide in the liberated state. And then, when coming out of that liberated state, attending to the khandhas, he would consider various things. So on one of those weeks he was contemplating the dependent co-arising, for example. But there are other occasions where he was in awe of what he'd realized, what he'd accomplished, and he wondered, how did I do this? How did this mind come to be completely free of suffering? How did it come to be liberated immaculately? And then one of the lists that he shared with us is the 5 spiritual powers. When made much of, when cultivated, lead to the deathless and merge in the deathless. One of my favorite lists of dhammas. So you have faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. So just these 5 things. If you want to keep it simple. Ajahn Achalo, when as a junior monk at Wat Nong Papong, when he was studying with Luang Por Chah, he used to use this as a kind of a mantra: Sattha, Virya, Sati, Samadhi, Panya. And he would ask himself, are all of these qualities present in my practice? Are they balanced? Because if when they're balanced, when they're all present, that's when we have a very powerful practice, and that's when we will tend to be able to progress. If some of them are weak, then we may not progress. But on a subsequent week, again, Lord Buddha experienced a liberated mind, and coming out of that state was contemplating, how did I accomplish this? And then he saw the 4 foundations of mindfulness, when cultivated, made much of, lead to the deathless and merge in the deathless meaning nibbana, the unconditioned. So that's a huge hint, suggestion, pointer to us about the function and the power of mindfulness. So what is mindfulness? Since we have this teaching from Lord Buddha, what is mindfulness? So that capacity that you have to be aware, and in the 4 foundations of mindfulness, aware of a form as a form, that's your body, that's your form, conventionally speaking. Aware of feelings as feelings, your knee pain, your back pain, your rapture, your peace, all of these things are feelings. Then you have your cittanupassana, the content of your mind. Mindfulness has a quality of discerning more truthfully. So we have a mind that is affected by ignorance. Because of ignorance there is delusion. So what is ignorance? Ignorance is not knowing the truth, not seeing clearly. Because we don't know the truth, there is a misinterpretation. That's delusion. The problem with delusion is it doesn't announce itself as delusion. We are deluded, but we often think we're right. That's delusion. Now, mindfulness helps us have more presence of mind and more clarity, and having more presence of mind and more clarity is sometimes described as truth-discerning awareness. Then we begin to develop more understanding of what is a wholesome Dhamma, what is a neutral Dhamma, and what is an unwholesome Dhamma. So, for example, a quality like self-righteousness. Because there's a feeling of a self who's right, it may never have occurred to us in the past that maybe we're wrong. Because I have a big feeling of being right, so I must be right. So many of you here are in an age bracket where you have children and grandchildren and nieces and nephews. And I'm sure that some of them are not living their lives the way they should. Is that right? And I'm sure that sometimes when you come to meditate you think, why does my son do this? Why is he marrying her? Why is he not marrying the other one? Why is he getting a divorce? Why didn't he finish his degree? He should have done this. He shouldn't have done that. Why is my daughter-in-law like this? And why is my nephew like that? Why is my cousin like this? Why, etc., etc., etc. Why are the politicians like this? They should, and they shouldn't. So we develop a bit of a sense for these kind of phrases and what the mind does. Certain things to be mindful of is when we start to think, how come they never grateful, no matter how much I do? Okay, how come they always complain? So we have to develop a sense for a big sense of self, having a big reaction, probably not wholesome. Even if there's a feeling of being right. So when we have mindfulness and we're trying to be aware of the breath, this is why breath meditation is so wonderful. You're trying to be aware of the breath, but there's a thought there, there's a reaction, and there's an opinion. But in the process of trying to be mindful of the breathing, you get a bit of more of a sense for how it feels. And then when you practice more, it's like, actually, this isn't wholesome. We begin to be able to take more responsibility for whether our mind state is wholesome or not wholesome. One other interesting list to refer to is the upakilesa. I won't go through all of them, but one of them is contentiousness. So it's like, and I remember living when Ajahn Viradhammo was at Amaravati when I was a novice. I was there for 6 months, and Umpa Viradhammo was being the abbot at that time, giving Umpa Samedo a break. And a practice that he did was that he would tell himself, do not contend. Don't be contentious. And it's another very simple thing to remind ourselves is that when you look at Ajahn Samedo, so much of the emphasis of his teaching is like, when you come to sit, it shouldn't be like this, it should be like this. Ajahn Samedo's response, it's like this. And so these great bhikkhus with decades of experience, they learn skillful means to kind of cut through the habits of the mind and to help themselves be with the meditation object. So that's the problem with delusion, and that's the problem with self-righteousness, is that it will take us away from our meditation. We have a story, the way things should be, the way things shouldn't be, what people should do, what they shouldn't do. We all have these habits. But when we're trying to do breath meditation, try to put that down. But in the process, it's a very good thing if we develop more discernment about what a trustworthy emotion is, and what a trustworthy reaction is, and what contentiousness feels like, and what non-contentiousness feels like. A large part of what can help us to be peaceful, of course, is an understanding of the law of karma. And then also an understanding of I was talking earlier with some old students about parents who had children and certain qualities they saw in their children that they did not get from their parents or their parenting. That it became clear to them that they came in with certain inclinations and habits and tendencies. Like, for example, somebody's daughter wanted to study classical singing from the age of 6. I remember my niece, her mother wasn't my dear sister, but she wasn't a particularly feminine she's a lovely person, but she's kind of dynamic. She likes African drumming and African dancing and a bit of a hippie. But her daughter, from the age of 6, was like, "Mom, can I study ballet?" And her mum's like, "Why do you want to study ballet?" "I don't know. I like pink. I like the dresses." This had come from somewhere else. We do need to contemplate this. We need to contemplate that our children are not ours. Our grandchildren are not ours. Our nieces, our nephews, our cousins, our parents-in-law, they're not ours. Every being is faring according to its karma. Every being has its latent tendencies, conditioned by, the previous billion lives. So sometimes these aspects of right view, conventional right view, there is karma, there is rebirth. There is liberation from this. But in conventional reality, this is the way the matrix of samsara, the cycle of rebirth, works. So sometimes when we want to be contentious, it should be like this, it shouldn't be like that. It's like, well, you might not be arguing with that person's opinion that they formulated this life, or that person's quality that you don't like that seems to have manifested in this life. That person might have been like that for 500 lives. Do you get that sense sometimes? You're talking to them, but you just can't get through. The way you see it, they just don't see it that way. But this is because we all have different styles of delusion. One of my monk friends, when I was a junior monk, he was talking about neurosis, and he says one of the ways he learns to practice with his and other people's neuroses is just to consider that as that person's style. So again, he was like learning a way to be not contentious with people around him who seem neurotic. Coming back to the 4 foundations of mindfulness and how we practice them. So when you come to sit, the wonderful thing about breath meditation is you're giving the feelings of the in and out breath your interest, but the body's there. You're trying to be aware of a feeling of an in-breath, but there might be a pain in the knee area, a pain in the shoulder. And so we're also learning about the nature of the body. It's full of painful and pleasant feelings, and neutral feelings. Trying to be aware of the breath, and a thought comes up. Thought about the past, thought about the future, thoughts about other people. So you're mindful of a thought as a thought. This is one of the tremendous values of doing formal meditation in a formal posture, is that during that time you're going to relate to thought differently. You're setting the intention to relate to thought differently. So while you're practicing mindfulness of breathing, you're just going to see a thought as a thought. Not I, not mine. Not my future, not my past, just a thought. And this is very powerful. Sounds very simple, but it's very powerful. Because what we don't realize, this is the power of our habit, is when we think about the future and we think about the past, we're actually creating a self in a world. And a self in the world has what? Suffering. First noble truth. You will meet with things you like, you will meet with things that you don't like, you'll be separated from things that you like, you'll have to be with things you don't like. But when you give your interest to the breath, and you just see a thought as a thought, and you allow it to rise and cease without grasping, You're stopping building a world for that period of time. You're stopping making karma with a sense of self. You're just allowing a form to be a form, and a feeling to be a feeling, a thought to be a thought, not I, not mine. And the benefit of it is that a quality of clarity and presence of mind grows through the act of being mindful of one object, not giving the interest or attention to the others, not running after others, just in that coming within the parameters of the body. Clarity, presence of mind, samadhi, some collectedness, the mind gathers. Lord Buddha gives examples in the suttas, wonderful examples of how important keeping this mindfulness within the parameters of the body are. There was one occasion where one monk wanted to see where samsara ended. That monk was especially gifted with his psychic powers. So he travelled to the end of our galaxy, to the end of the universe, into another universe. He went so far he actually got lost and he met another Buddha. And that Buddha had to send him back and give him the directions to get back to your universe and your Buddha. But he told him, this is not the way. Samsara doesn't have an end. The conditions have no end. The phrase is the Ananta Jagawan, the unending universe. He said, go back and ask your Buddha where the universe ends. And then the Buddha says, within this fathom-long body is where you have to put an end to suffering. Again, that's a huge teaching. It's what's going on here that causes you to suffer. And when you practice your breath meditation, you should be able to see that. It's your craving for. It's your craving not for. It's your wish that things were other than the way they are. Causes you suffering. And when you can be with an in-breath, and you can be with an out-breath, and you can just allow the body to be a body, feelings to be feelings, mind objects to arise, stay for some time and cease without grasping, you will have much less suffering. And this quality of clarity, this quality of presence of mind gets more clear, more present, more profound. Again, there was another example of may have been the same bhikkhu. I'm not very good at remembering names, but I remember the story. So the story was, a monk was thinking, I want to see if the end of suffering comes from going like as far as I could possibly go in heaven. So he's going up through the heaven realms, realm of the four kings, Davatimsa, the Yamadevas, the Tushita, the Paranimita, up and up to the Brahmas. And the Brahma's like, what are you doing, man? And he's like, I'm trying to find the end of the universe. I'm trying to put an end to suffering. He says, your teacher's the Buddha. He knows, go back and ask him. So, to the highest and most subtle heaven? No. To the end of the universe? No. This is what a self trying to find an answer does. It will go on and on and on, and more and more and more extreme. And then back to the Buddha, and the Buddha says, do not try to find the end of samsara in the conditions. Find consciousness with no showing, where the four elements find no footing. So he's saying, in your mind, if you come inwards enough, with enough mindfulness and enough clarity and enough samadhi, you can experience something where the four elements can't stick. That's where your liberation is. But how are you going to perceive that? How are you going to experience that? How are you going to experience a mind where no four elements stick? You can, but you're going to need a lot of mindfulness. And you're going to need samadhi. And you're going to need wisdom. Sati, samadhi and panya, the forest masters talk about it all the time. If you condense it and make it more simple, mindfulness in all postures, consistently, gives rise to samadhi, collectedness. Wisdom, what is wisdom if you want to understand it simply? Contemplate the three characteristics. Anicca, dukkha, anatta. That's what mindfulness sees. Mindfulness sees impermanence. Mindfulness sees unsatisfactoriness. The mindfulness is truth discerning awareness, and the three characteristics of the truth. But if mindfulness is good, and there's some collectedness, and whatever is arising, you're seeing it, letting go of grasping, seeing it, not identifying with it, seeing it coming inward, that's when the path factors can converge. The path factors are conditions. They are conditions that lead to the unconditioned. Even mindfulness itself is a condition, sankhara. But when it is the condition, as Lord Buddha had the insight, it's the condition that leads the mind to glimpsing and experiencing the unconditioned. So we must depend upon it, and we must cultivate it. So this is where the formal meditation is very helpful, because this is where you clarify your mindfulness, strengthen your mindfulness, deepen your mindfulness. And a lot of people say, well, I just practice being mindful in all postures. And I'm like, really? Because I don't do formal meditation. Often this teaching is taken as an excuse. I don't do formal practice because my whole life is my practice. Really? Another dinner, another anniversary, another graduation, another engagement, another divorce, another death, another funeral. That's your practice. And I'm not convinced. You definitely can be mindful in all of your postures, but if you want to be, you have to do formal practice. Because otherwise you have weak mindfulness in all your postures. So the benefit of sitting in a formal posture and taking one thing as your object, the breath, is that's making your mindfulness good mindfulness. And yes, you have to be mindful in all of your postures. So at the end of your set, you set the intention, I intend to be mindful throughout the rest of the day. How do you know if your mindfulness is good mindfulness? This is your test. If mindfulness is good, when an unwholesome mind state arises, you can know it and let it go. That's how you know if you have really good mindfulness. If your mindfulness isn't so good, you're having a reaction, you're feeling grumpy, you want to respond, maybe you can restrain yourself from speaking on a good day, if you have some mindfulness. But if you're having a reaction, if you're grasping a reaction, if you're about to speak, you know you shouldn't, but you still speak, this is not good mindfulness. Okay? But if you are diligent with your practice, and you cultivate good mindfulness, training in formal meditation with meditation objects, especially the breath. Walking meditation is also good. Aware of those feelings at the bottom of the feet, that presence of mind in the present moment. If we can do that once a day and then increase to twice a day, many of you are retired, I can see. So yes. You can do it 3 times a day. Then you will have good mindfulness. And then you really will see that you're mindful of your mind states as they arise. And then you know if they're wholesome, neutral, or unwholesome. And you will be able to let go of them quickly. That's when you know you have good mindfulness. And then you can train your mindfulness to do things like notice cessation. So it's like you come to sit, you want to be with the breath, there's a grumpy mind state. You know, maybe your husband says something that he always says, or maybe your husband did something that like he never did, you know. Whatever it is that gets you upset. So you're coming, you're sitting, it's okay, there's that familiar mind state. Observe it as it stays for some time and ceases. So rather than feed into it and believe it and grasp it one more time, it's like, okay, there's that mind state, very familiar with that one. Observe it, notice it change. It's almost like the volume comes down a bit. And then there's a moment where it ceases, whatever it is, whatever your mindset is, whatever your reaction is, whatever your thought is, whatever your opinion is, when you come to sit and observe the breath, they all cease. And if you have good mindfulness, you can be aware of the breath while that's kind of going on in the background, but you're also waiting for it to change, and it's like you can say, see, I knew it would change, and then you're waiting for it to cease, and it's like, aha, nirodha, anicca. It ceased. And then if you're with that good mindfulness, you're aware of what the mind feels like when it's not oppressed by one of our habitual reactions or opinions. It's like when it really is with the breath and the reaction's gone. completely gone. What you were upset about for the first 5 minutes, it's not there at all. And this is when the mindfulness begins to get more powerful than our habits. And this is very liberating, and this is very encouraging. And that can be the same for any of the 5 hindrances. So you come and you sit, maybe some craving for, first hindrance, craving not for, second hindrance, maybe some sleepiness, the third hindrance, some anxiousness, some worry, fourth hindrance, some doubts. So it's like you come and you sit, there's some hindrances, that's normal. Don't try not to grasp it, notice it change and notice it cease. That's your cittanupassana. That's your dhammanusati. You're aware of an unwholesome object. Giving your attention to the breath, notice it change. Notice it cease, when you just stop feeding it. And in terms of like the cultivation of samadhi, many of you have been meditating for a long time, coming and listening to Dhamma talks for a long time, so I'm sure you're very interested in samadhi. Most people want to get jhana. And in my experience of samadhi, even though it's limited, it's not a matter of getting anything. It's a matter of you stop feeding the hindrances and you keep giving the mindfulness to the object, the wholesome meditation object, and at some point the hindrances aren't there at all. And the mind experiences a period of deep peace, which isn't moving from that peacefulness. But it didn't get anything. It stopped picking things up. But in order to experience that, you have to have good mindfulness, consistent mindfulness. You have to keep meditating. And if you can increase, recently a lady came to my monastery, she was 80, and she knew many of the disciples of Lumpur Man in northeast Thailand, and she was meditating for 45 minutes a day, morning, afternoon and evening. I was so happy to meet her because that's the advice I give to my students, and I don't think any of them listen to it. Well, they listen to it, but they don't do it. And so I was so happy to meet her. Oh my God, I'm a Buddha. I met a woman who actually following my advice without me telling her to. So I asked her, could you please be my disciple, because I want to be able to say at least I've got one who does it, you know. And she said to me, I still don't feel like I'm really getting anywhere, Ajahn. But then she said something very interesting. She says, but I have noticed sometimes when I'm not meditating, the Buddha arises and there's just Buddha residing in my mind. And I said, well, that is something. That is something. That outside of formal meditation posture, the mind is with a wholesome meditation object. That is progress. She says, but I want to put an end to rebirth, so what can I do? I'm really serious. I don't have long left. What do you recommend? But then she says she has some pain when she sits on the floor. She asked, can she do lying down meditation? What do you think I said? I said, no. Because it normally, I know some great elder monks practice lying down meditation, but they started that after decades of meditating. So if a person has really good mindfulness and they apply it to lying down, that person can practice with lying down meditation. But most people are going to get a bit fuzzy, a bit dreamy, a bit sleepy, and fall asleep. So what I did say to her is to sit on the floor as long as she can, have a chair next to herself, and then get up and sit on the chair. Because so many of us do this. You might have more time to meditate, but you sit and it's just too painful. And even your mind might have got peaceful for 10 minutes. And then what people do is like, okay, I've done my meditation. But if you've got the spare time and your mind's really going to get peaceful, it's really much better to meditate longer. Meditate more. So have the chair next to you, sit on the floor. Sitting on the floor is important and is helpful because the quality of the mindfulness and the wakefulness tends to be better. And then you sit on the chair. You still keep your back straight, and then you sit for a bit longer. Then the more you are with a wholesome meditation object tends to affect the quality of your mindfulness and how much samadhi you do or don't develop. For myself, a lot of people will know that Ajahn Achalo spends periods of retreat in India at the Bodhi tree. And these days, I was recently there for 3 weeks and I sat for 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon, 3 hours in the evening, 9 hours a day for 3 weeks. I've done those kind of retreats many times, I think about 18 times. But what I do, because I have a big and heavy Western body, sometimes envious of these nice, slight-framed Asians. I wonder what kind of merit I need to make to be born with a smaller, lighter body. But what I do is I sit for the first 45 minutes, a little watch there, with the right leg on top of the left. At the end of those 45 minutes, I just swap. I put the left leg in front on top of the right. And just in that little action of moving back a little, moving the legs a little, adjusting like that, the pain kind of calms down, and I can sit for another 45 minutes. And then, some pain again, and so I will just put into a cross-leg position. Again, just wriggle slightly, and sit for another 45 minutes. So it's possible to keep sitting. And for those of you who want to experience consciousness with no showing, mind where the four elements find no footing, the end of samsara, the end of suffering, I encourage you to work with your meditation objects and sit more, because it does work. The biggest problem, I think, or the biggest challenge people have is with not quite doing enough and not quite doing it consistently. So it's like you have the tools, you have the methods, you have the faith, and you're doing it, but we tend to take one step forward, one step back. And then, not surprisingly, we don't get anywhere. But if we can train ourselves to do a bit more and to be very consistent, suppose you might have a busy period. There's really a lot happening with your life. I still don't recommend stopping. I recommend that, okay, reduce the amount of time. I've got many things to do. I can't sit for an hour and a half. Okay, sit for 15 minutes. And morning, afternoon, and evening. And when you can increase it again, increase it. Don't give up the habit. We have to grasp at the wholesome first. That's what makes it possible. You need a raft to get to the other shore. You do need to grasp to the raft. It's not yet time to say, I don't need a raft. You will drown. So part of the raft that leads to the other shore, your dana, your sila, your meditation practices, and then we need to grasp at those skillfully, understanding that that's the conditions that will take us to the unconditioned, and do as much as you possibly can. So I offer that for your reflection. I hope something I said might have been helpful to you.